In this movie, we will focus on the visible property. As a programmer, you can create a situation where objects or controls become visible or invisible either at design time or through code and therefore execute at runtime. In this sample program, I have two buttons, one for the visible function and another for the invisible function. That is, clicking on the visible button will cause the labels to appear, clicking on the invisible button will cause the labels to disappear. I have three labels, and I'm simply going to allow them to be named as their default name of label 1, label 2, and label 3. And they simply contain some text so that when they appear we can see that they're visible. By default, most controls are visible in their property window. For example, if I click on label 1 and go to the visible property, I see that it is set to true. I can change this to false, and I'll do likewise for the other two labels as well. Now, the initial setting that you set for a property is only going to be in effect when the project initially runs. Once the project is running, then the user's actions and ultimately your code will control the visibility, or for that matter, any property state. Now, let's take a look at the code window for the visible button, which, since our objects are going to start off being invisible, we will need to write code to make them visible. Again, remember I'm simply using the default names of label 1, label 2, and label 3. And I'm going to write code that will simply make the visible property become true. So label 1.visible equals true means to set the visible property at runtime to true. The end result, the label becomes visible. And I will do likewise for the remaining two labels as well. Notice that as you type this in the Visual Basic environment, the visible property is linked to the IntelliSense, which says there are only two possible values, either true or false. So when you are keying in code, you want to pay attention to the IntelliSense cues to prevent some very common mistakes. Now, we'll run this project even before we write code for the second button. So as the project runs, as you can see, or as you don't see, the labels are not visible. By clicking the visible button, those three labels now become visible. The invisible button's job is to make those labels disappear. So we'll need to write code to make that happen. Going back to the form and double clicking on the invisible button, we now have an event procedure open up for us so we can write some code. Now, of course, what we could do at this point is to simply type in label 1.visible equals false, label 2.visible equals false, and so forth. Or we could simply copy and paste the code in the code window and then simply change the values of true to false. And then very quickly we have now created another event procedure. So let's test the program. Again, the initial setting is being controlled by the properties window, which was set at design time to false for those three labels. Clicking visible causes those three labels to appear. Clicking the invisible button causes those three labels to disappear, but only because of the code that we've written over here in the code window behind each of those buttons. Visible, invisible. Take note that there is not a property called invisible. The property is visible, and it can be set to either true or false.